this one anime project, and I hated it. It was as someone who likes to think of myself as a little bit of a feminist, it was everything that I hate about the dumb, big-boobed, did I mention dumb girl character? But the great thing was that I had this director, and she hated the show as much as I did, and we became really, really good friends. And so through the course of bonding over how much we hated this show, she became one of my best friends, and still is my best friend to this day.
I would tend to agree with Kari in that there aren't like individual characters that I dislike. It's usually the story. Usually if I'm working on something and I find the story distasteful, I usually find some way to get out of it. You know, like I think John Rhys Davies, who played Gimli in the Lord of the Rings films, at one point he said, who do I have to F to get off this movie, right? Like, and he said that about future films, and then he got on Lord of the Rings. He's like, oh, actually, this film is really cool. I like it. So he was happy with Lord of the Rings. And there are times when I've said no, and when I can research it. For instance, there was a movie that was coming up, and they wanted me to work on it. And it was a dubbing thing, and I did a little research on it, and I was like, this is actually a creepy film, and I'm really not hip to this. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna have it. Also, I worked on one of the first shows I ever directed, I Miami Strawberry Eggs, has a sort of very awkward relationship between a high school teacher and one of his students that starts to become romantic. Now, this happens, right? And so we can talk about this, but we have to talk about it in a way that's honest and doesn't glorify it. And some of the anime was trying to glorify this relationship. And I was like, oh no, we are not doing that. You know, like we can talk about these things because these do happen in real life. We have to talk about the actual consequences, the emotional consequences of these people if they try to do this. And they didn't, you know, like it was averted in the story. But anything in the story that seemed to act like, oh, isn't this a cute fetish? I'm like, no, we are stopping that right now. This is not a cute fetish. This is not something that is to be held up or idealized. And so I think, you know, actors can do that on all sorts of things. You know, they're actors who say, I'm just not gonna work with this kind of project because it doesn't line up with my values. In the past, when tobacco products had advertisements, you know, there were voiceover people who wouldn't do tobacco products. Political ads, you know, there are people who are like, I'm sorry, I can't do a voiceover for that politician because I can't feel good about that. For them, it's very rare. It's very few and far between. And usually, if there's something that looks that bad to me, I sort of run in the opposite direction.
For me, if it's just going to the on-camera world for a second, sometimes sort of practical effects can get a bit hairy. If you're in, so I've done some work out in Eastern Europe under American companies and British companies, but it can get a little bit scary because the health and safety isn't quite what it could be. So I've had things happen like I've been 16 foot up on a window ledge, and I've had to jump up on it and sort of, you know, scope out what's happening below. And as I did that, the whole window ledge disengaged from the side of the building, and I just plummeted. And some thinking very fast, sort of like body checked me out from a dead drop onto the tracks, like below where the camera was going to come out. So, you know, moments like those make you sort of question the job that you're on. I've had that, and on another job in the UK, we were playing a team of SAS specialists, so the equivalent of I guess SEALs over here, and the scene was to have a forest behind us strafed with bombs and munitions and such. And the pyro guys set all that up, and I was with the star of the show. The star of the show was behind me. We were the last two guys in the row of men walking forward with all our guns and stuff. And at the last minute, I said to him, "Hey, listen, do you think we need ear defenders? Because there's going to be, you know, there's pyro." And he went, "Hey, hold on." He went, "Yeah, do we need ear defenders back here?" You could hear them talking up by the cameras. Like, no, you should be fine. Well, action was called, and we took, you know, one step, two steps forward, and then the pyro went. Well, not only did we need ear defenders, but the pressure wave literally pushed us up off our feet and sent us like face down into the dirt and skidding along. So, for me, that sort of changes slightly the timbre of how you feel about working on certain shows. It's always a very physical thing.
I worked on a game. I don't know the name of the game because it was all coded. I got called in the night before. Hey, we need you to come in and do some miscellaneous voices. I'm like, all right. I go in. They're like, right, here's the script, and you're Goblin number 13. And I was like, okay. And I start looking through it, and it's all in vowels, like O, E, I, A. I was like, what's going on here? Are this typo? What is all this? It's like, oh no, you're just gonna be making goblin noises. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'd never done any character, monster voice, anything at all. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't know any goblins though. And I was like, just make up some goblin noises. And I had this guinea pig when I was little, and I used to talk to it, and I'm like that. So I was like, and he was like, yeah, perfect. And so I went in for like 4 hours. It's like, you're on fire now. Just doing that for 4 hours. At the end of the session, I couldn't talk. I was supposed to start this new series the next day, but I couldn't talk, and I lost that job. So whatever that game is, I don't know the name of, but if you're playing the game and you hear, that's me. And that's the game I lost my voice on, and I lost the whole job. But yeah, my least favorite, I don't even know.
There's one video game, I'm not going to name names, but it was just a thing where the dialogue was so ridiculous, and it's kind of what we talked about before, about like class clowns and so forth. One of the guy that was directing the game was a really good friend of mine, and we just could not get through this game without just laughing at every other word. And that was one of those games that I was just like, why did they hire me for this? What could they have heard in the audition that made them want to, give it to me? So it was that game, and then there's a few others, but we'll leave it there.
All right, thank you.
Ready with the back half questions. We haven't got that anyone from the back.
Right there. My friend with the beard.
I just had a question for all of you, and is there a certain level of creative freedom you have when you're voicing a character from an anime or a video game? And if so, what is the thought process behind how that character should sound?
Creative freedom. Well, I think the challenge is that this notion of creative freedom, I think with it comes this idea that there's maybe a rehearsal process where there's opportunities to try different choices about a character. That doesn't exist in voice acting, right? I like to call voice actors the short order cooks of the acting world. We're sort of given a dozen eggs, a loaf of bread, and some butter and said, quick, make breakfast for 20. And it's like, there's just no time. And so the creative freedom is, am I doing it well enough that they want to keep paying me? Yes, good, let's keep going. And I think a lot of the, quote, creative freedom, especially for voice actors, happens before you get to the studio. You've developed your voices, you've developed the tricks in your belt, that you can pull out at a moment's notice when you need to. That's where your creative freedom lies. But when it's time to get in the booth, they sort of want results, like right now. It's very rare. I can tell a quick story. They were auditioning a show, and this is a story about D. Bradley Baker, who does amazing character voices. And they had him audition for this character in this show, and they wanted the character to have a French accent. And Dee said, I don't really do a very good French accent, but I do a killer German accent. So he did the character with a German accent, and the producer said, oh, it's Dee, wonderful performance. Could you do it with a French accent? And he's like, I told you, I don't do a very good French accent, but I can do German. They said, great, we'll name the fish Klaus. That's American Dad, right? And so where was his creative freedom, right? I mean, it happened even before he got to the studio. And so that's usually when we get to the studio and we're faced with the character and the script and the story, we're problem solving. We're desperately trying to figure out, okay, how do we make this as good as we can in the next 10 minutes, right? And so I guess that's creative freedom or something, but we're just trying to make it as good as we can in the moment. There isn't this sort of sitting back with a beret and a cigarette on a cigarette holder going, what do you think? Do you think we should do it this way? Like, there just isn't time for that.
There's also, it also depends on if it's something original that you're doing or if it's something that's pre-existing. You know, if I go in and I do original animation for Rick and Morty or Gravity Falls or something like this, like I'm creating a character from scratch. There's no template. So myself and the director, we get to kind of collaborate and find the direction for the character. Whereas if I do an anime show, that has been created first by someone in Japan. So it's there's a respect that has to be paid to the original performance and the original tone of the character. So that adds a layer of I don't want to say constraint, but it informs your decisions as an actor, if that makes sense. So, you know, if you are doing an anime character, or if you're doing a video game that's already been released, like a Final Fantasy game or something like this, if the character sounds very husky and mature, you're not going to make her sound like a 12-year-old girl in the English version. Although every once in a great while, it will work the other way. Like they'll say, this is a 40-year-old battle commander, and you listen, and it's like, you know, and they're like, no, the American audience is never going to buy that she's a 40-year-old battle commander, so they'll sometimes kind of age it up a little bit just to make it more palatable to the American sensibility. But I think that the creative freedom that you have is also kind of dictated by the project.
Would you say that that's also the case if you're doing something like Wonder Woman, right? Because Wonder Woman's sort of an established character, and sort of you're stepping into her shoes.
Yeah, I mean, I did Tigress for the Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness TV show, and for a couple of the video games, and I remember getting down to the final audition, and it was between me and one other girl, and the other girl sounded slightly more like Angelina Jolie, but they thought that I was funnier, and I ended up getting the job. But when I went into the studio, there was a long kind of learning curve as everybody was trying to figure out how much of this do we want to sound like Angelina Jolie, and how much do we want it to just be informed by the Tigress character and what the scripts say. So yeah, anytime you're taking something like Wonder Woman or Tigress or something like that, you also have to sort of pay a little homage and respect to the canon of the character.
Final Fantasy question, because this is technically a Final Fantasy panel.
So, of all your Final Fantasy, I had the word earlier, credentials. Which scene would you guys say was each of your favorites?
I'm very fond of when Rude and Reno at the end of Advent Children are sort of, Rude turns to Reno and goes, "You know you like it. It's flashy." Yeah, that's pretty funny.
I quite like the scene when all the lads are together on the train, and Ignis's eyes are gone, and he's, you know, telling Gladio to stand down in his berating of the prince. It's all the sort of dynamics of these young lads who are grappling with their adulthood and loyalty and what it means to sort of stand in power, and yeah, it's really lovely. We've had this discussion at a couple of other conventions where how much we love as you know, the lads in the car, and also Keith Farley, this idea of just you know, the sort of it's something that we don't get a lot of in current media, just young men sort of loving each other fraternally, and sort of what that means, you know, without having to bro out too much, and, you know, just to be cool to each other, kind, and you know, generous of spirit.
That's what I like most about Final Fantasy 15. Is just the relationship between all the four guys. Yeah, that's really what does it for me.
Exactly. Yeah, that relationship's great.
Centerpiece of the whole game. Yeah. Hello, by the way. Aside from the death of Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, which final
Spoilers.
I said spoilers. Anyway, which death in the Final Fantasy would you say is most iconic to you guys? Which one's really the most iconic deaths?
The entire orphanage in Final Fantasy VI. That's only funny if you've played it.
Let's focus on life, kids.
Who's your favorite Final Fantasy life?
I'm not sure I know enough about, I'm aware of Aerith, but other than that, I don't know enough about the Final Fantasy deaths to be able to speak with any sort of expertise.
Maybe there's a YouTube video out there, like top 10 Final Fantasy deaths. Or maybe one could be made.
You'll never believe number 7. Alright, so okay, we can move on to the next question. The definitive answer is Aerith. So
I can move right here.
oh wait. You asked what you had a question already, correct? Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna try to get to people who haven't gotten a chance to ask a question. Prompt them.
Thank you. I have a question for the 15 crew. What line or moment do you feel really defined your character or hit you the hardest?
I love all the stuff where Gladio's screaming when he fights. I love that he can scream like that and then be so emotional, right?
I think maybe that moment of, for me, for Ignis, when he's, whatever it takes, I will protect you. Puts that ring on, For me, that was, I love that one.
I think for me, anytime there's like, that hey Princey, there's just like this great snark and just kind of, RNA already looks like she's a little into S&M. You just imagine. I'm sorry, that was my inside voice. I'm sorry. No, but there's just such a great, like, badass, snarky stuff whenever she's like kind of insulting them. Just me.
Building off that, and this is for me personally, Chris, how was it to do what was literally a 15-minute cup noodle advertisement? Where they do all but look into the camera and smile all over the cup.
Chris, do you get cup noodles for life now?
No, but I want to get the message to them that I would like, a steady delivery of. It was a pleasure to do, because I do like noodles like that, a great deal. I eat them a lot. I like it, I like to take the broth out a little bit, so there's more of a concentration of noodles as opposed to broth. I'm just more of a noodle guy. So, it was a pleasure.
Send nudes.
It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you for your questions. We'll clap. Right here in the front.
This is a question for the audience. If you found yourself dumped into the Final Fantasy universe, what class would you find yourself gravitating to? Like fighter, black mage, etc.
Alright, so your choices are white mage, red mage, black mage. Barbarian. Fighter.
Just someone with a sword.
If you can think of a generic D&D class, it's probably in Final Fantasy. So what would your D&D class be?
Never played it, so I'm not sure what these classes are. Sorcerer? Something like that? Magic user? Magic user, yeah. God stepping bravery. Magic user. Anyone else?
I just want to beat people up. It's so fighting. Some sort of fighter. I want to. Yeah.
Like a monk.
Like a gun sword or hand? Like Tifa, I guess.
Monk, barbarian, fighter. So many options.
So many options.
You don't remember the old D&D cartoon? Cavalier, acrobat. Exactly. I am dungeon master. Your guide. No, okay.
Keep going.
They go in that creepy, like, carnival type
Yeah,
thing.
carnival. Like, where is that carnival ride? I need to
Where's
find
that
that.
going, man?
Six Flags. Let's go. Right. D&D. It's funny, even though I hashtag elf life. I think if I were to play D&D, it would probably be a paladin. Paladin is a fighter who has a very noble sensibility and so therefore has magical powers like a cleric. I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Thank you.
I don't know. I'd be miscellaneous henchman. Number 6.
The hamster goblin.
But in battle, I would fake my death. And wait till everyone's gone. And
Impressive.
run off into the wilderness and be happy.
Okay, so you'd be a bard.
Deeply heroic.
I thought that was a great question. Dragoon was the correct answer there. Dragoon. Like RNA.
When did Dragoon become a class? Is it like...
Season Kane, Final Fantasy 4?
Oh, you're talking about Final Fantasy, I'm not talking about D&D.
Was it 3? No, Cecil and Kane is 4, yeah. 4 in the US. 3 in the US is 6, yeah. Yeah, don't be glad you're not into this. Alright, next question. Let's go to the back. Yes. That's the most excited I've seen someone ask a question.
No.
No. Did you say no? Is that what I heard?
That was an accident.
You're doing very well. You're doing great.
Is that a mouse, Kigurumi? A cat, Kigurumi, okay. Neko-chan.
For someone who's just now becoming interested in the fandom through like friends and stuff and considering becoming a part of it and playing the games, how would each of you like convince them to coming over and like playing the games? Like how would you personally like advertise it?
That's tough because I don't really play the games. I think the only Final Fantasy game I played is actually 1 because I could download it on my iPad and I could play it and I was sort of curious what it looked like in its first iteration. And it was sort of interesting to see how they were trying to make this game from the beginning, but that's the kind of thing I do. I like to research things from their inception points. But I've never played any of the other Final Fantasy games. But usually with any sort of medium like anime or animation video games, it's usually about trying to find what the person likes. Like, for instance, my father just never really understood anime. He didn't get it, he didn't understand it. But my father has an obsession with World War II. So the moment that I found Porco Rosso, which is basically a Miyazaki film about a guy in 30s Italy as the fascists are rising to power, and he's a seaplane pilot trying to live on his own. And I'm like, Dad, I think you're gonna like this thing. He fights against fascists in Italy before World War II. He's like, oh, this is great, you know. So it's usually about finding whatever anyone's fetish is and giving them an entry point.
You couldn't put that better.
Oh no, no, I couldn't. It doesn't get much better.
I think the whole aesthetic is so fantastic in Final Fantasy. If you get your friend just to look at someone playing it for a while, I think very soon they'll get drawn in, almost, you know, very quickly indeed. And there's something for everyone.
Wake up.
Exactly, right? This is what's going to happen to your friend. Just put them in front of you.
Who doesn't want to be that, you know? Well, and another thing going along with all of that is that it's so character-driven that I think everyone can find some character that they either relate to or root for. So, you know, I think that's a draw for the franchise.
Shilly-shally, dilly-dally. I would imagine that there's a lot of people that even if you invite them over there, maybe they might not, feel the characters or the voice acting or whatever, but they might just be into just the technical stuff, like how the games look, and the color, and the lighting, and the animation, and the way it's done. I mean, there really, truly is something for everybody in that game, in that world. So it's like, you got nothing to lose. Your friends have nothing to lose by coming over and playing. I think.
Have them start with Kingdom Hearts or something. Disney characters. Good place to start. That's where I started, actually. I played that for many weeks until I realized I was there for many weeks. Cheetahs spread across my chest. Thought I should go outside for a little bit.
Okay.
I always said that the selling point for the series for me is building on what they said is the characters. Like, I think that the series, for me anyway, as a longtime fan, it was always like, it had the best character development of like most of the series. Like, most of the series out at the time. When JRPGs started becoming popular, and now I can appreciate them even more, that I'm not like 7 years old playing Final Fantasy VII. And I'm like, wow, Cloud's cool because he's got a big sword and spiky hair. And now I think the same thing. Thank you for your question. way in the back with the red shirt. Yeah. Testing? Hi. So I asked Crispin this yesterday, but for all of you, how were your experiences, whether you were involved or not, with the voice actor strike about a year ago for video games?
There just wasn't much going on when it came to video games, because there was a strike. Yeah. And it was, quiet. It's quiet on the video game front.
Keith Farley was actually instrumental in fighting outside of the line on that, which was great. The director of 15, so he sort of used to report back every now and again, and sometimes he was disgruntled and a little low morale about it, and other times he was really sort of up on what was happening. I believe also a lot of the games were sort of farmed out to Europe, to the UK and such, because they pay us much less over there. and so English actors were getting a look in a way that they hadn't had before. But then Keith reports back, well, that may have been the case, but there weren't necessarily great voice actors out there. So there was that going on too. So an interesting time. Very, very interesting time.
Keith Farley, the director of Final Fantasy, was the chair of the negotiating committee for the union, so he was leading the charge for the negotiations. I was also on the negotiating committee with Keith, so that I was sort of on the front lines with him, trying to see if we could come up with a better contract. This was a contract that probably should have been negotiated over the course of, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and it stretched out over 3 years because we couldn't come to decent terms on it. And that's why eventually we asked the membership, we put a vote out to the membership and said, hey, we've reached an impasse. The last tool we have left on our arsenal is to go on strike. What do you think? And 98% of the union membership voted to go on strike. So that was a decision by the union as a whole to go on strike. And it's true, while we were on strike, there wasn't that much video game work. But eventually we were able to get back to the table and we did get a contract that was better. There were still many things that were unaddressed. And so hopefully as we move forward, we can get better terms as we move forward. There's a big cultural difference between the Hollywood culture and video game culture. And sometimes there's a lot of miscommunications and misunderstandings. And so I think the video game world is still very young. It's still in its infancy as an entertainment industry. And it's very similar to what actors had to deal with back in the 1930s when the actors first formed their actors union. So I'm hoping that the video game industry will mature in the way that it treats all of its creators, not only its actors, but its developers too. If any of you know any developers that work for video game publishers, you know that they work crunch time. You know, they work these horrible 80-hour weeks or more for 6 months, 9 months out of the year. It's inhuman, you know. And so there's a lot about the video game industry that needs to mature, it needs to be more reasonable so that you're not just burning through artists. So, you know, you don't want developers developing carpal tunnel and, you know, ulcers and heart attacks. And we as video game voice actors don't want to be blowing our voices out and bleeding from our throats, which has actually happened to some of our members, and doing permanent damage. As, you know, Johnny had the problem where he got on this game and he came out and he lost another job because it was too much, it was too hard. That should have been scheduled differently, right? They should have said, hey, this is going to be really tough. Why don't we split this up over multiple sessions so we can still get the work done, but we don't damage your instrument. This is the growing pains of a young industry. I'm hoping in the future that it will be more equitable for all involved.
I mean, I read different kind of, I read a lot of promos as well, so I don't know if I necessarily noticed a slowdown in terms of video game auditions, but, you know, Crispin's absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the, you know, people bleeding from their throats and people totally blowing their voices out, and I almost lost my voice. I did a video game called The Cruise, where we just flew through that. I had to do the Nicolas Cage voice, and we flew through that video game, but I was really burned, and I thought at the end of it, this should have really been scheduled for 2 separate sessions. So kudos to Keith and Crispin for leading the charge on that. It's long overdue.
Raymond.
Okay. This is just kind of for all of you. You've all worked on a lot of stuff, but what's like the line you remember the most? Obviously for Ignis it's gonna be that one.
I'm gonna sit back.
I still remember my line from Family Guy, which was the first job that I did. It was I had to do Charlie Sheen, and actually maybe that's the answer to the question. That performance I'm embarrassed of, and it's one line. It was well, excuse me while I get my little black book. It was that. That one, and yeah, I remember that's fine. The first one.
Obviously, in the Final Fantasy world, it's, you know you like it. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. But I think the most memorable line that I have is actually from Doc Hack. Yes! I played a character called Lord Balmung of the Azure Sky, And at the end of one of the TV series, I can't remember which one it was, like all the .hack characters come together and they're having a big party. And Lord Balmung is looking at them and they're all like, hey, should we go join them? And he said, the line as it was written in the script was, this party's really swinging or something. And I was like, it was really odd. And I was like, what is this line? Why did you, and like, well, we're trying to have Lord Balmung say that he's excited about the party, but we want him to sound really dorky and nerdy. And I was like, oh, I got an idea, just roll it, right? And so, we get 3 beeps and then we're supposed to come in, so I went beep, 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 and I went, this shindig is the bomb diggity. And all the other .hack characters go, what did you say? And I'm like, oh, nothing, this is cool, I like this, all right, let's go. So it's still, I think, it's one of my favorite lines.
Well, it's not voiceover, but it's morphin' time is probably. Actually, not my first.
That's why you're
I worked at Subway before that. I was a sandwich artist.
It's toasted time.
Eat fresh in time.
I can't think of one. I can't think of one right offhand. I remember doing this little anime that I loved, Last Exile. Yeah. So I played Lobby in that, and so I just remember years ago just loving the line, "Screw your stupid chivalry, screw it!" So yeah, whenever I would get really angry, I would just say that.
Do you say that in life sometimes?
Sometimes.
All right.
Have any of you had the opportunity to meet the Japanese voice actor for any of your characters?
Great question. No, I haven't. I'd like to.
Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, not. No, love to. I wonder what they'd think. I mean, it'd be quite interesting meeting that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I've actually done an interview with Sugita-san, who plays Kyung in the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. I was fortunate enough to go over to Tokyo and they set up an interview with us for some Seiyu voice actor magazine in Japan. And it was very funny because he was dressed to the nines and I had my suit on with my Alexander Queen scarf and we were both being very fashionable. And so yeah, it was fun. It was fun meeting him. I've also interviewed Tomokazu Seiki, and although we've never done any of the same voices together, we've been in stuff. The one I'd really love to meet is Joji Nakata. I haven't had the chance to meet him. He plays Alucard in Helsing and Fulkin in Escaflowne. But I did get to meet Yoko Kanno, the music composer who did Cowboy Bebop and Escaflowne and everything. And she's pretty fabulous. So.
I met the original voice actor for Ichigo, and he was cool. He was a lot like me.
Is he a Power Ranger too?
He was throwing imaginary pitches in the back behind the stage, and he was just some random. He was a random Japanese guy throwing pitches, like air pitches. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I just walked up and I swung at one, and then I found out that he was the voice of Ichigo, and I was like, oh, I'm the voice of Ichigo as well. And we were like, oh, okay. We got up on stage and bonkai'd at each other for a little bit. But he seemed like a cool fellow. Not much of that story though.
I think it was the voice actress that did Fu in Samurai Champloo. I think we met in passing at a convention and we just giggled a lot. Smiled a lot at each other. I think we both thought it was pretty cool.
I always fear meeting people like Japanese people because I don't speak. Like I know some Japanese from from the anime and things like that, but I have a guitarist who's Japanese, and he introduced me to this. She was a singer, like a pop idol, so she did voiceover. She sang, and she's whatever, a model or something. And I tried to say, hey, how do I say? We kind of do the same things or whatever. and I think it was Onagi, and then Onani was like as masturbation. One of them is like the same. And, he did not tell me that I was saying the same. He told me that I was saying masturbation. So I went up to her and I was like, masturbation. And then she was like, looked at me funny, and she's like, And it was so weird. And I was like, Polo, what did I just tell her? And he's like, you said masturbation. That's not what I said to say to her. How do I redeem myself? And I just avoided her the rest of the time.
Johnny, I think that may be my favorite convention story I've ever heard you say. That's amazing.
I hope I'm telling the story right. Yuri Lowenthal tells the story about being at this famous restaurant in Los Angeles called Kate Mantilini's, which unfortunately does not exist anymore. And a lot of celebrities would eat there, and he was there when Jake Gyllenhaal was there, who played Prince of Persia in the movies, whereas Yuri played the voice of the Prince of Persia in the games. And he's like, I gotta go up and talk to him. And so he goes up, and as you can imagine, celebrities in this restaurant sort of have their armor up because they don't want to be harassed while eating dinner. But Yuri was like, hey, I play Prince of Persia. and Jake Gyllenhaal was like, that's nice. And Yuri walks away and he goes, oh, I didn't tell him I played the voice. He thinks I just played the game.
That topic, Kari.
Wonderful. Right here. You got a mic coming right to you. Hold on.
Yeah.
You don't have to be sorry. You're good.
Question for everyone. Of the projects that are currently out, what was one that you wish you could have been on? Existing project now out that you wish you could be on.
Specifically Final Fantasy or just anything?
Family Guy. So fun. Why was I not Stewie?
Well, this is okay. Well, this isn't a current one, but I was a huge fan of Batman the Animated Series. It was one of the things that made me want to be a voice actor, and it was just a little before my time, you know. So when I moved out to Los Angeles, you know, I missed that window. But eventually, I got to work on some of the movies. You know, I did the Starfire and the Teen Titans movies, and The Killing Joke, and stuff like that. It was called World Number 2. It's my finest work. So I've gotten to work on spin-offs from that world, but that series passed me by.